So good afternoon, everybody. I think we have now one of the vibrant and most energetic topics here in Davos. It's about innovation in Europe. My name is Mösenbacher, and I'm from the DAAA, or Digital Asset Association Austria, as we call it. And when we face this topic, on the one hand side, we Europeans are often criticized, we are over-regulated, we are too slow, we have no leaders, we are this and that. There's some truth in it, of course, but the question is this also a narrative of competing nations? Because we're facing more and more international tensions, and it's a competition of power blocks. And we should never forget that Europe is the home of Airbus industry, the leading plane manufacturer. Spotify was coming out from Europe, Bandman, an Austrian company, Red Bull, an Austrian company, SAP from Germany. So there's still some innovation power here in Europe. But one thing, what we often hear is, has Europe the winning gene, or did we lost the winning gene? Because I was attending an international investment conference, and one of the international speakers was saying a quote, and I think there's some truth in it. The Americans are at the table to win. The Chinese are at the table to win. The Europeans are at the table to be at the table. And the question is, are we still at the table? So please welcome my wonderful panel. We will discuss this in the next half an hour. We have here Daniela from Germany. Daniela, a word on yourself.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. My name is Daniela Boback. I'm supporting the German blockchain association called Bundesblock, and we are the voice of the German blockchain industry, and try to bring some value into the German markets.
Then we have Jeff. Jeff, please.
Yes, good afternoon. I thought this was the Greenland panel. Is that? Sorry. Somebody had to say it. I'm Jeff Bandman. I'm COO of the 6529 group of companies. We're actually art publishers. We have an asset management business, and we build technology related to NFTs. And I also recently became a board chair of GBBC.
Michael?
My name is Michael Carr. I'm the CEO and founder of Buen Crypto Consulting. We're a professional advisory providers for Tier 1 and Tier 2 crypto exchanges, and we work with large traditional finance firms that are now eventually merging into this space.
Thank you. And Paul?
I would like to start with a small story. So I like the model from Otto Scharmer called Zero U. I don't know if somebody knows this, but this is how you can make innovation. And you start with going into the context, find out what's happening, and then you go in silence, like in Davos, somewhere in the mountains. You let the future come out through yourself, and then you go back to the market and implement it. And we did more or less the same process 2.5 years ago. We started with a family office who owns a substantial amount of colored gems, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, so everything except diamonds. And as you know, every colored gem is like a piece of art, but they wanted to sell this not as individual stones, but as a bunch of stones tokenized on the market like gold. So we needed a year how to set this up, and we found a way how you can invest into a basket of quality. We call it Emerald Standard Unit, which is more or less a connection to kilogram of colored gems, depending on how much you want to invest. And we tokenized it. And that's GEMx. We make tokenized emeralds, rubies, sapphires, and a lot of other things around colored gems.
Thank you, Paul. So let's start with our wonderful lady, with Daniela, on a scale 1 to 10. Yeah, 1 is not very good. 10 is we are the rock stars of innovation in Europe. How will you rate Europe? That's a tough one. Yeah.
I'm trying to be the Swiss, like directly in the middle. So between 5 and 6.
And why is that? Why is that? Why are you on a 5 to 6?
Well, I think we can do innovation, but I think we somehow, as an example, in regards to regulation, we over-regulate sometimes too much, in my opinion, which leads to the point that people who actually really want to build something new are not able to do so because of all the stuff which is going around their actually, target or whatever they want to do.
And Daniela, when you look a little bit in the digital asset scene, how will you see our industry when it comes to innovation? Because we have Bundesblock.
Well, I think there is a lot going on out there, especially in Germany, and most of the people don't know, but as you already mentioned, we have SAP, we have a Siemens, a Bosch, and those companies are actually silently implementing blockchain into their infrastructure, which is really good, but nobody is really talking about, so to speak. So there is something going on. And we are actually pretty good in tokenization in Germany.
Do you have an example for that?
An example for tokenization?
You said you are pretty good for tokenization in Germany. What are you doing?
We have, as an example, no, I mean companies who are building platforms to tokenize.
Like GEMx. Paul likes this. So, Jeff, it's always interesting the European view. Are we good? Or are we not good? Are we the champions or not? And you lived in the US. You're a Native American. You live now in Cyprus. What is your outside view? How are you seeing Europe when it comes to innovation? When we have a table, mostly the people are talking about Shenzhen, Silicon Valley. Is anybody talking about Europe? What is your view on that?
Yeah, well, I definitely have, kind of see both sides of this. As you mentioned, I'm a kind of born and bred New Yorker, but for the last 5 years plus, my wife and I have been living in the EU. In Cyprus, which is tremendous health and wellness benefits. The Mediterranean is actually an incredible bioactive area, and I think that the innovation in Europe actually is going to be not just in technology, but in health and wellness in many areas that are just getting going. So I think Europe has a lot of advantages and opportunities. I've been struck by this honestly, and kind of thinking about our conversation, but even in the past week here in Davos and then in San Moritz before that, just like the tremendous amount of kind of creativity and knowledge, it's like kind of the second wave and third wave, kind of some of it is mid to later mover advantage where people have tried different things, but I'm seeing a lot of tremendous excitement, idealism, and from people from Germans, Croatians, Serbians, Estonian, people from all over. Just a lot of really interesting and innovative and often quite mission-driven products. I do, think, Europe. It's hard to kind of describe it, I think, without seeing kind of some pros and cons. And I think that Europe has been very early, and the EU has been very early in a number of areas, like GDPR. Europe was the first place to have a comprehensive regime, protect privacy and data privacy and personal privacy, and other countries are still catching up to that. These things can be fine-tuned. I think in the digital asset space, the EU again, they had a very long consultative and process that include all the different facets of government and stakeholders and associations like ours that commented on GBC, that commented on things, and it was with the full digital finance package, MiCA, DORA, DLT pilot. The Europe has done a lot of things and been early and been very transparent and consultative. I think there are a couple of things that I see that are putting some of the innovation at risk, and their decisions that the EU needs to make. And ultimately, it's for kind of Europeans and their constituent bodies to do that. And so I'll give a couple of examples of things that I'm seeing. One of them has to do with just how is MiCA being implemented, and MiCA does not have a third country framework for reciprocity and how to sort of integrate Europe with the international market. Kind of the architecture of MiCA provides that if you want to kind of do a number of these things in the EU, you have to have an EU presence, an EU issuer, so on. The U.S., as much as the U.S. gets, criticized for being, America first, the Genius Act provides for kind of reciprocity for stable coins. I think I heard earlier in this conference that Switzerland does. So, the question is, what are the relationships going to be with the rest of the world? And I see in trading, crypto assets are a global market, but, for reasons, and I think bona fide reasons, because regulators have to, balance missions. There's been some movement to kind of internalize certain types of trading, within the EU, which, gives the regulators the ability to supervise and know who the participants are. But it might, give the European market participants less access to global liquidity. So I think there are trade-offs. I think Americans have a lot of concerns about, the status of kind of free speech in Europe, and especially free speech online. And can you have a free exchange of ideas with the Digital Services Act? I mean, obviously, Elon Musk and J.D. Vance have criticized the EU, and I'm certainly not going to wade into the middle of that debate here. But I just want to point out that I understand a number of the things that the Europeans are trying to balance at the same time, and the U.S. has a history of a First Amendment. But how does innovation work together? With the free exchange of ideas, and if there are ideas that can't be expressed. So I do think, the EU, I see tremendous challenges. The EU has been first and very transparent in a number of things, but, I think has some decisions to make about how to implement some of these things.
Thank you, Jeff. Michael, you are a little bit in between, in the middle. Ireland is European, but also with a strong tie to the United States. How do you see the situation?
Yeah, Ireland, of course, biggest ally or one of the biggest allies is the United States. So we generally sit on the fence, definitely with a lot of US, I suppose, influence in Ireland. But when it comes to innovation, a lot of, we say, the US companies that have settled in Ireland, a lot of their innovation hubs are there. So if you go to Dublin, you'll find next door to each other, Meta, Google, Microsoft on the one street. And a lot of their R&D departments are based there due to various reasons, but it's probably the multicultural skill force that's there as well. So Ireland, we would look to innovate back into the US. Obviously, there's certain reasons why a lot of US firms comes to Ireland for tax, not just tax though, there is those skills as well. But we're seeing more and more firms where we thought, due to the new regime maybe in the US, firms would leave, or there was that fear, there's always that scaremongering, I think, throughout Europe. Oh, if these firms will go back to the US, they're expanding. Meta has just opened a humongous centre in Ireland. It's probably employing now about 5,000 people or more in that centre. So we're seeing innovation still moving steadily. And I suppose to touch on one of our own, Stripe would be one of the biggest payment firms now entering this space as well. And we're seeing they will be global, and they're a good example for everyone in Ireland as well to expand.
Michael, you are in the consulting business. Yeah, you have a wonderful company called Buen Crypto Consulting. First, how comes that that you named your company Buen Crypto Consulting? It sounds a little bit, I see, interesting, really very innovative.
Yeah, that's a good question. We get asked that a lot. I wasn't expecting it today, but I come from crypto. I suppose the term would be, generally not in pans like this, degen. So I started trading crypto in 2017, fell in love with it from day one, and had the ups and downs of trading and loved it. And then about 4 years after that, I was walking the Camino Santiago in northern Spain, and I had this idea for this professional service advisory for exchanges and traditional firms, but it would be getting advice from crypto natives that understood their business, that traded, that lost money, and had experience within that sector. And when you walk the Camino, you don't say hello if you pass someone, you say Buen Camino. So hence This is where Buen Crypto came from, Walter.
That's a great one. Yeah, that's a great one. I think it would be nice when you walk through Davos, you would say Grüezi, yeah, and so you have the Grüezi crypto company, consulting company. Michael, how are you helping companies when it comes to innovation?
Yeah, we would see a lot of innovation. We work primarily with digital asset firms or traditional firms, and it's a constant because you want to be the market leader. All these firms want to be number one, have the number one product, launch their product. Regulation is always there. It's not in the background, but to get a product out, you can't get tied up in regulation. But our advice always to firms is you don't always have to reinvent. So we would work with exchanges and we would say, let's look at some technology that's out there or a product that's out there or something that was launched by another firm, maybe even a competitor, that just didn't sit with their clientele or their market, and reuse that. You don't always need to come up with something brand new every day to launch a product. And we found that through various firms. We've taken a couple of bits that we've seen in Revolut, for example, with a couple of exchanges when it comes to sending money using a tag instead of actually using the wallet address. That was Revolut. Revolut did that first, but we can use that and they can use that. And again, it makes it easy, and that's what brings adoption. If people are used to using certain ways of doing things, like that tag in Revolut for me to send money to you, Walter, and they're using it on an exchange to send money to someone on the exchange or somewhere else, that brings adoption. And you don't always have to be that shiny star inventing something new that someone sees and blow the world apart. There's a lot of technology out there, there's a lot of products out there that might just suit you. And we advise clients on that. And especially with Paul here, the tokenization piece. Everyone wants to create that new tokenization piece. But it's there. Just make it work for you is what we would give the clients as advice.
I think that it is a good word to bring in Paul a little bit in the discussion. Paul is not only the CEO of GEMx, Paul is also very, very engaged in the startup ecosystem and is in Dubai, in India, in Europe. Paul, how do you see the situation when it comes to innovation? What are the other doing better than Europe?
So first of all, I just said the CRU model because this really is by my heart the model I really like, and I like to explain it around that. So you start somewhere in the context, and then you try to find the future and bring it out, and then you go and you have to implement, to do all the operations. So, and I think Europe is very good in the first part, going in the context, analyzing, finding new use cases, but also seeing how to apply it into the ecosystem. But then it gets a little bit slower in the implementation. For all the reasons, are good reasons, maybe not so good reasons, it takes slower in Europe. And the second thing is, which takes time, is that it's not so bold communicated in a lot of times. So people don't see what's really happening in the background because there's a lot happening. And another reason, of course, is that a lot of money, at least when you want to scale, is in the US. So people with bold ideas go where the money is. So they go to US, to go to Dubai, to Middle East. So Europe is good in the first part, and we see and we support a lot of with the startup initiatives, the startups at the beginning. And now the next step is use, again, innovation to reinvent how Europe can keep the companies within Europe and build these positive atmospheres. And there are already some podcasts, there are already some newspapers around, but it needs more than that. And I think now the things are coming like live coding, live things, so people start to see what's coming, combining this with tokenized equity and all that is coming. We can keep money within Europe where people invest and then take the next steps from there. So there's a lot going on in the background. It's needed now more than ever. We have seen also in times of COVID that money was distributed through crowd investing platforms, for example, also innovative. It exists since, 15 years or something. And this is now coming. So Europe is innovative. There are a lot of great scientists, but it needs to get the self-competence to create all of them or a lot of them within Europe and scale it from there.
Jeff, we often hear €1 is the idea, €10 is the product development, and €100 is the marketing. Yeah. So Americans are always the champions out there in the world to make some business out of it. Yeah. The Europeans, the researchers, the first step developers. What can we learn from the Americans? Because we were the founder of the MP3 format. Yeah. But Apple did the business.
I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, I grew up in Manhattan, kind of, pre-internet, and I used to feel, hey, growing up in New York, hey, it's the center of this, it's the center of that. Obviously, many people would disagree in terms of history, whatever. But also, now we have, information is accessible to everybody. The ability to collaborate is available to everybody. Remote work, distributed workforces, and so on. And so I think that kind of where you are geographically, is not necessarily the determinant that it used to be. Due to the ability of remote teams to communicate. To communicate, to collaborate, and so on. So I think marketing and communication is a mindset. I'd say, like, I've heard just from over the last week, really like interesting creative ideas, and some of them are kind of investment ideas. Some are ways to create new decentralized network states on chain, which is something I'm personally very interested in, from kind of different European groups, using technology and principles, I had never heard of. I do think that, you say to yourself, well, what is the scarcest commodity in the world? And, it might be, a rare earth mineral that's in China or Greenland, just to mention it again.
You love this topic.
No, I just know that I think it's amusing. There's been more discussion of it, I gather, and this is only my first full Davos, but I gather it's been discussed more at this one than others. But no, I mean, I think that the scarcest resource is attention, and life seems to be moving faster and faster, and it's hard for people to multitask. So getting things that kind of capture and engage people's attention. So I think that's kind of a muscle memory. I think it may be that it's sort of more ingrained historically in American culture, but or it may be that there cultural reasons people are more kind of understated versus overstated. But ultimately, when I was kind of early in my career, and people would make fun of marketing, and they, the corporate slogan would be kind of, the people doing marketing are the last to know and the first to go. I don't know if anybody ever heard that one before, but I've subsequently learned that marketing is actually very strategic and important, because you have to know both internally and externally kind of what you're doing, what it is that you're explaining, and then have the ability to explain it not just from your perspective as to, hey, we did an upgrade. Well, what did that accomplish? Well, we effectively redecorated our office. Well, what are the benefits to consumers, or who's going to use it? So I think there's been a global expansion in that, and it may be that America and Madison Avenue was good as that, but I think you can look all around the world. People have come up with captivating ideas. So I don't think anybody has a monopoly on marketing.
Yeah, we see it. The Americans say Genius Act, and the Europeans says MiCA regulations. Yeah. The Genius Act. Daniela, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just maybe wanted to add, from my perspective, what the US is actually doing quite good. They have a really good strength in capital, in speed, and in risk appetite, right? So capital, the venture capital is really undermined to innovation. Speed means that they have been able to create an environment where founders can really scale extremely fast. And with regards to risk, what did I say? Yeah, their risk. They're having. They have built a culture where it's okay to fail, right? And those three things, I think, are the winning source for an innovation, why is the US so good? And on the other hand side, maybe if I may add to that, the Asians are actually really good in execution and in adoption. Like markets like Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, or Yeah, they're all really good in implementing. They have in payments, in gaming, in digital assets as well, and in user interface applications, right? And this is where I think we can learn a lot from that. But on the other hand side, also we are in Europe really good, as you said, with the regulation in MiCA. And I think to add this to your question before, if we are still at the table, I think we are, because what we have built is kind of a base heartbeat, so to speak, a baseline of the heart. And what we now need to do is to actually give it a little bit more speed, right? So that's my take on that.
That's a very good one, because we have 10 minutes left and we want to talk about the future a little bit. And in the preparation of this panel, I invite my fellow panelists to have a journey into the future. And everybody has a role, and I ask Daniela, what if she is the upcoming EU president? Yeah, we have now Ursula von der Leyen, and then Daniela will our next president. And what will she do that Europe is competitive? And I think it was a kind of speech what you already started, Daniela. So let's phase it out. What should we do in the future?
Well, my favorite of maybe three things would be shifting the mindset a little bit more away from regulate risk, more to enable innovation, right? So that's the first one, to be motivative. The second one, I would say I would implement sandboxes on EU level, and especially when it comes to AI. We had this panel before. I would actually try to have a sandbox for blockchain and AI, because I think there are a lot of potential in between. I don't think that everywhere it has to be used together, but I think at the end it has to be find out, right, where. And I think the third would be that I would foster to use the technology on ourselves, right? So, I mean, there are lots of potential in the administrative processes, we all know. And with that, I would also try to get a good level of standards in regards to data, because what we have experienced is that we have different data standards for every process. Every administrative party has another standard in data. And this cannot be a base to use the technology as effective as it could be.
Thank you, Daniela. Let's come to the entrepreneur side, Paul. You gave us a little bit an insight of what GEMx is doing. What will you see in the future within GEMx? What are your next steps? What are your plans?
So our core idea was, how can we digitalize an industry which is not, let's say, in terms of financial digitalized. I mean, they look at a lot and how to do grading, so look at the quality of stones, but there is no standardized product. So the first thing was, how can we digitalize this industry? And digitalizing in that sense means we had to find a way how people speak with each other, how to find a common standard, how to make the quality of stones transparent. So if somebody buys a token or something, know what they really get. So this was taking us the last 2 years. We were working with graders from Brazil in order how to do the grading. It comes to Switzerland. We work together with Gubelin, who again checks it with different grading and how to align it. So again, it's more like people speaking with people in order to find a standard. So this is what we did. So now we have a standardized product. So the next thing we want to build around is an ecosystem. Topics like staking pools, using it for innovation. Because when we talked, we did some research about what young people want to do, and they don't just want to invest and hold it. They want that their investments can do something. So the next thing is, we talked already with some NGOs in order maybe you can dedicate your tokens to an NGO and they can get maybe some liquidity, use it for good activities, and then you get it back. So building an ecosystem around this. And this is again a change. First of all, it was you hold it, you cannot do anything. By digitalization, you can suddenly build a whole ecosystem around it and enable other things. So that's the next steps we want to do, making the ecosystem where not just store it as a store of wealth, but get maybe some yield on top of it, enable innovation. And of course, there are a lot of ideas, but there's regulation, so we have to check first the regulation before we go into that direction.
Look at the energy of our DAAA president. Yeah, we will see him on the Forbes magazine on the cover in the upcoming years. Michael, Daniela is our president and you are our commissioner for digitalization. You have all the budgets out there in the world. Everybody agrees with your opinion. Everybody says Michael is the best guy in the world. What are the three things you would immediately take in place? What would you change immediately on a European level?
Yeah, I suppose I'll speak from a personal level on the first point. Innovation comes from entrepreneurs generally. Okay, you get large organizations that will have big product teams, but innovation comes from entrepreneurs. And I started my own business. There's no supports. And there's no support to take a day off, which is a lot of people forget. You live in that world 24/7. So if I had that position, Walter, I'd be putting in lots of supports for entrepreneurs and self-starters because, you know, and I don't mean this to me, but not everyone gets up every morning. Not everyone will keep that hustle and to create that product or to create that business. So, and I would see that as, from a personal level, that when I started off, you're on your own. So I'd put those supports in. That would be the first thing. Secondly, I suppose in that position, we can talk about regulation for the next 5 hours, but sometimes you have to finish regulating things and let it go. You know, it's like a child. You know, you have to let it grow up. And Mika was only finished, and people were talking about Mika 2. You know, the transition period and grandfathering period isn't even done, and people are saying, when's the next bit? And there's businesses there that regulation has been designed for. Go make a business out of it. Go create. You know, so again, I'd put those supports in to allow that adoption as well. And you know, we work with exchanges. We work with those financial companies. And probably the third thing is, if you're going to support innovation and support entrepreneurs, you have to be creating a product that someone needs as well. So blockchain, when it came out first, everyone discussed, well, sure, you just created something that maybe people don't need it. And we've all seen projects developed that the one question I would ask at times, who's going to use this thing? You know, who actually wants this? And a lot of the times you create the problem first, and then you say, oh, we've created this product for this problem. It was never a problem. You made it a problem.
That's a German thing. We always see problems everywhere.
It comes out from your mouth. Yeah, it was not mine. It comes out from your mouth. Jeff, when we are looking at the crypto industry, we always have two barriers. One is the trust barrier, and the other one is the technical barrier. And I think the next step should be, how can we bring in the real economy? How can we bring in the traditional finance industry more and more and more and more? What are your suggestions for these topics, for this trust issue?
Yeah, I think those are great, very important questions. And you know, I would look at it both at kind of legislative level, but also what can kind of the industry and the market participants do. So I'll start with the second one first, because I do feel that's what those of us here in the room are convened to do, you know, representing kind of the industry and the entrepreneurs. You know, which you know, part of it really is, you know, kind of education and kind of who are the stakeholders and participants. You know, something that has impressed me about GBBC, and as you know, as an observer and then a board member and now chair, is, you know, the widespread participation. You know, it's great to have kind of crypto natives, and you know, I personally went from like regulator to crypto to NFTs, which is, you know, getting into your degen category, you know, because crypto wasn't frontier enough for me. But something that's always impressed me about GBBC is that we have like kind of, quote, you know, real economy, you know, so we have crypto native, we have, you know, kind of finance and TradFi, you know, we're doing initiatives, all of them, but also real economy with supply chains, and then, you know, kind of a publication that I think is available at the back of the room that GBBC has done around kind of real world, you know, use cases. So, you know, kind of that education so people can understand it's not just a POC and things like that. You know, so that kind of bottom up, you know, broad, you know, where we can all be evangelists and people, can work on different working groups on things like risk mitigation and standards tracking. So that's kind of what I think some of the things the entrepreneurs and community can do in addition to building those businesses is that patience, because not everybody is coming into this in the same place. I think the other piece of trust does come from providing legal and regulatory certainty. I was really thrilled and admired kind of the entire multi-year process that the EU did to do MiCA, and I think part of it was being scared by the Libra proposal. Sometimes I think the EU might have actually in the end been better off with Libra than kind of what's happened subsequently. That's a whole different cut. But you have a multi-year, multi-stakeholder, transparent legislative process at the pan-European level that includes digital finance and cybersecurity, as well as all these rules and things. Those are very important. GDPR was important. But then the implementation is also a thing. And sometimes I'm concerned about whether is the implementation of MiCA aligned with the legislative goals. And I think MiCA was envisioned to be like MiFID and give all the national competent authorities a role. And now there seems to be a push towards centralization, which would sort of crowd out those. So I think you can build trust in a number of ways, both community-driven and government-driven.
Thank you, Jeff. So I think we really figure out the impossible. We ran through the innovation of Europe in just 30 minutes, yeah? We did the status quo, and we really had good ideas. How can we do it better? So a huge applause for our fantastic panel.